begin the process of discussing justice and honor, I think, frankly, honor is largely unrecognized in North American circles as a cultural frame of reference for people. You don't see Hofstede talking about honor. In the Globe study of leadership, where they studied people from 62 countries, they had roughly 17,000 surveys. They don't deal with honor as a frame of reference, and I think it's simply off the radar. I'm convinced that this is one important ingredient in understanding the scriptures better as well, too. When you see Jesus and the Pharisees contesting power, contesting authority, it's an honor game that is being played. And there are anthropological rules that govern those types of games that the scripture opens doors for us to see. And if you begin to look at the Bible as a whole and understand the role honor plays in it, suddenly things that hadn't made sense to you before begin to make sense. Now, when you think the word honor, often it's associated with the negative, which would be shame. In Asian context, you hear the word face a lot rather than honor, but those two are ascribing a parallel situation. Justice is often associated with the negative of guilt. I'll get into this instead of trying to explain it all right now. The core theme of honor, it's a type of social rating, like a credit score, that enables a person to, or entitles a person to interact in specified ways with equals, with superior subordinates, according to the honor rules of the society. The parallel, in some respects, credit ratings in the U.S., it ties the in-group together, it creates and maintains unity. All of us in the in-group are responsible for our honor or our face. Any one person can bring dishonor to the group depending on what actions they're involved in. So the phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child," is built on this concept of honor, because a child needs to be trained up in the way he or she should go, and when he's old, he or she will not depart from it. But there's an element in which honor plays a significant role in that. And it wasn't until I began to understand this, and we'll talk about this more later in the course, suddenly discipleship was different for me. When I think of the discipleship framing I took in my time in Africa, cross-cultural discipleship can largely be framed, not exclusively, but as an honor game. Giving face to people, them having face from being connected to you, or loss of face. But we tend to ignore that altogether, and we don't pay attention to Hebrews, to Jesus scorning the shame and going to the cross. If we understand honor and shame, it really makes a difference in terms of how we relate to people in the framework of discipleship. And here it's a claim to positive self-worth. Don't confuse it with self-esteem. And it's not something you grant by putting a smiley face on an elementary child's paper in class. But it's not just your claim to positive worth, it's also whether society acknowledges that claim and respects that claim as well, too. So the positive value of a person in his or her own eyes, which is self-respect, plus the positive appreciation of that group, of that person in the eyes of his or her in-group. And I would say enlarged then as well, too, it's how the in-group is perceived by different in-groups in the society. You think of this in the African setting, as I mentioned in Kenya, 52 indigenous languages. Which language was the language that was most powerful? To choose a very powerful group's language as an official language of the country would have communicated the message to all the rest of the groups about where they stood in the ranking and hierarchy. And it's interesting to note the two major tribal groups in Kenya that have ongoing tensions with each other, Kikuyu and Luo. The first president of Kenya was a Kikuyu, Jomo Kenyatta. And when he passed on, the second president was from western Kenya, where the Luo are, but he was not Luo himself, he was Kalenjin, a very small tribe, less threatening than the larger tribe of Luo would have been. Neither group was willing to allow someone from that other group to be named as president, to become president. They had to find a compromise candidate, and a compromise candidate had to come from a small power group. The reality is, over the several decades that he was in power, however, his group became extremely powerful. And if you wanted to succeed in business, you had to have someone from that group as part of your business, or you wouldn't be able to get things done. So people honor their in-group by doing and saying what the in-group members expect. They fulfill their in-group obligations. But realize it's not just family of birth that plays a big role, but it's also, perhaps in Japan, what university you went to. We have a parallel when we think of I'm a Harvard graduate or I'm a Princeton. I'm a graduate of neither of those. Harvard, Princeton, Yale. When you think of Stanford, you can add a number of universities to that. But if you add I'm a graduate from one of these schools, that brings you a certain amount of status. It might get your foot in the door in positions that otherwise you might not be given a chance to get. Okay, so when we look at this core framework, we've got multiple ways of envisioning it. And the American symbol for justice is a blindfolded person wielding a scale and a sword. The sword is the enforcement of justice. The scale is weighing it. The blindfold indicates that justice is blind. It doesn't matter who you are. Justice is based on truth. Honor, it does matter who you are. It matters in significant ways. So when we think of this frame of honor, the difference between the good guys and the bad guys is whether they use human shields or make themselves to be human shields. That's an image drawn out of the American frame of reference in understanding this war on terrorism that the United States is involved in. Do you use people as human shields? There's no honor in that. Or do you shield them yourself? There is honor in that. And you can see the frame of reference, and it's also insulting Islamic methods, at least in the larger American culture at this point in time right now. So honor, in terms of thinking through what is involved with honor about cognitively, in-group or the patron is the primary focus in honor, in maintaining honor. You favor in-group members. So if in this case, Dustin and I are members of the same in-group and a job opening comes up, and Tariku is also applying for the job, if Tariku has stellar qualifications, but he's not part of my in-group, by nature I'm anticipated to favor Dustin over him because Dustin is part of my in-group, even if Dustin is not qualified at all. And that's a moral play, and that's an ethical frame of reference for people working in in-group situations. So you can see honor and collectivism often go together. But within the in-group, you can compete with in-group members for a position. So if Jeff is also part of my in-group, and Jeff and Dustin both are applying for a job, I might look at who's more qualified, or I might look at who's closer to me, depending on the circumstances for that. But you compete with members outside of your group without restraint. In many respects, they're not completely human the way you are when you're part of a very tight collective. You're one of them. You're the other. And usually it's a male-oriented game more than a female-oriented game. Though women play the game, they don't play it the same way men do. It's a masculine-oriented game, if I'm going to use Hofstede's terminology. Justice, on the other hand, the individual is the center of focus, and it's who you are. You should show no favoritism. That doesn't always work, but that's the ideal that's expressed for systems of justice. So the president should be treated equally to a street bum. You compete with all equally. We have this saying in the United States, anyone can be president until the 2008 elections, as long as they're white and male. Anyone can be president. Now we've realized, okay, we can cross the racial divide in determining a president. We have yet to cross the gender divide. So we say anyone can be president, as long as you're born in the United States and you have a birth certificate to prove it, playing off some of the ways that Obama was treated after he was elected. But in this case, typically both genders should be equally involved. Both genders can fight for justice. And if I can say it here, truth, justice, and the American way. You can see how that gets framed out. Think of how this gets into evangelism. Again, we'll hit that more later in the course where I'll expanding that out.